There has been a very familiar story playing out in the Zenless Zone Zero community over the last few weeks. It is one we have all seen before. A new Hoyoverse game launches, there is a honeymoon phase, players begin to declare it is the best one yet, and then, right on schedule, the veterans, the players from Genshin, from Star Rail, show up in the replies to warn everyone that the cycle is about to repeat. That is the script. We all know how it goes, except this time, the script changed. Just as this debate reached its peak, the developers at Zenless Zone Zero released a dev talk, and in it, they seem to have agreed to fix, well, everything the community was actually complaining about, from the endgame grind, to the story, to the breaking of old characters. So the question is no longer, is this the cycle? The new question is, did the cycle just break? We are going to look at exactly what happened, what was said, and what it all means. If you appreciate this kind of breakdown, a like on the video and a subscription to the channel are always a good way to show it. So where did this all start? It began, as so often does, with a single post that was, let's say, very optimistic. The core claim was simple: Zenless Zone Zero is the best Hoyo game, and the person who posted it laid out their evidence. They said the developers were buffing older characters like it's Christmas, a very festive, generous image. They claim the endgame doesn't require the newest characters, which is, as we know, a major point of conflict in these communities. And of course, the big number, 100 polls per patch. They even took a direct shot at Honkai Star Rail, claiming HSR never treated its players this well, not even in its own honeymoon phase. Now this post was more than just I'm having fun, it was a declaration. It was almost evangelical. You are preaching what you believe is new, good message. And for this person, the good message was that Zenless Zone Zero was different. It was a belief that the developer philosophy here was fundamentally better, more free-to-play friendly, and just kinder all around than anything that had come before. It was a very strong, very pure-hearted belief, and as you would expect, it is precisely what kicked the hornet's nest. Now, what is interesting is who pushed back first. It wasn't the expected haters or the rival communities. The first most significant cracks came from the inside of the Zenless Zone Zero community. The replies were measured. People calmly pointed out that the original tweet was, quote, a little overshill, or exaggerating. It is a polite way of saying you're trying too hard to sell this, and it's not entirely accurate. These players immediately took issue with the claim that endgame doesn't require the newest characters. They said, well, that's not really true. They brought up the specific endgame modes, Deadly Assaults, and Miasma bosses. They explained that in that content, you absolutely do need very specific agent roles. The main example was needing a character like Manato, specifically for Rupture. Rupture is just one of the damage types in the game, but the problem is, the new bosses are designed to only be beaten efficiently with that one mechanic. So your team that you carefully built without it, it doesn't matter. It hits a wall. And this is where we see the pivot. When the original poster was faced with this specific evidence-based critique, they didn't double down, they just shifted the arguments. The new claim became, well, I'd expect people to have at least one S rank every 2 patches, since Zenless Zone Zero gives a lot of pulls. And well, the argument completely changed. It is no longer you need these characters. It is now, it is okay that you need these characters because the game is generous enough to give them to you. And that is the real conflict right there. It is the gap between the perception of generosity, getting 100 free pulls, and the reality of the endgame. The reality is that your viability, your ability to actually clear the endgame content, the hard content, is still chained to pulling the very specific new units. This is where that free-to-play friendly argument starts to look very thin. And once that argument started to thin, that is when the veterans arrived. These weren't just Zenless Zone Zero players, these were the long-time Hoyoverse players, the one who have been through Genshin, who have been through Star Rail, and their reaction was, well, it was predictable. It was almost a single unified voice, echoing across the quote tweets, the cycle repeats. And they immediately pointed to Honkai Star Rail's launch. They remembered all the HSR is so much better posts, the all of the Genshin could never slogans, and now in their eyes, HSR is seen just as bad, if not worse. This even created a strange split, where you had these surprised converts, players who came in hating Hoyoverse, calling Zenless Zone Zero a gooner game, who then admitted it is the game I play the most, and banger after banger. But these new fans were clashing directly with the jaded veterans. And so, when they see this exact same praise for Zenless Zone Zero, they don't see optimism, they see a honeymoon phase. They see a script they've already read. This wasn't about one game, it was about a pattern. There was one person who posted that quote, fool me once, ending with fool me 3 times, you're a jerk and I'm stupid. And that really captures the sentiment. It is a fundamental distrust in the long-term monetization, how the game makes money. And the developer cycle theory was spelled out very clearly by some creators. They defined it it as a specific loop. The game ramps up difficulty slowly in between big onboarding moments like patches 1.4, 2.0, and 2.5, and the goal in their view is to get players that already spent to spend more by applying just enough pressure. These players feel trauma-informed. They have been conditioned. They expected the good times to end, and they expect the company to be the reason. This is why they jumped on that buffing older characters claim. This new optimistic player sees buffs and thinks, wow, they're so generous. But the veteran player asks, why do they need to buff older characters like it's Christmas if the game is so balanced? They saw a hypocrisy, a contradiction. You can't claim endgame doesn't require new characters and in the same breath celebrate massive buffs for old units. The veterans see those buffs not as generosity but as a symptom, a sign that power creep, where new characters just get stronger and stronger, making old ones useless. It is already happening so fast that the developers are forced to step in and clean it up. But the sharpest point came from a dolphin. A dolphin is just someone who spends a little money. Not a whale though, who spends thousands, just a regular paying customer. This dolphin described their experience where their scores started steadily moving backwards. Even while they were spending, they were having to sweat just a little to pass 20k. And this person laid it out perfectly. They said, the reason I quit Starrail was because my teams couldn't cut it anymore because I didn't pick up a few specific shill characters. They're talking about their investment, their time, and their money being invalidated, being made worthless by the new updates. And then the final line, they said they saw Zenless Zone Zero heading in the same exact direction. And that is the core of the trauma. It goes beyond vague anger. It is a specific financial and emotional complaint that the cycle is all about disrespecting the player's investment. And it is a very hard argument to ignore. But what is really fascinating is that this entire very loud debate about monetization, about the cycle, about free-to-play was running parallel to a third completely separate conflict. This group wasn't talking about polls, they weren't talking about endgame content, they were talking about the game's soul. This was specifically painful for them because so many players genuinely loved the cast. You would see comments like, the cast of characters are just so damn likable, or I don't actually hate any Zenless Zone Zero characters. Even the NPCs got this praise. The Zenless Zone Zero agents, NPCs, and Bangboos even, they are just so freaking great. The best NPCs I have seen. It was because they liked the soul so much that they felt it is lost. They felt the game's core identity was evaporating. The first most common complaint was about the vibe. People missed the urban fantasy feel of the early game, the style of 6th Street. This new mystic aesthetic on Yunkoi's summit, they just find it boring, generic, and this extended beyond the scenery, right into the narrative, the story. The criticism was that the plot has become directionless and repetitive, where the early chapters felt like they had tension. The new villain, Sarah, was described as hollow, a Looney Tune villain with no real stakes. It just wasn't compelling. The narrative critiques got very specific. People pointed to the proxy's changed role, how the MC in the Hollows, in place of 0-1, didn't feel justified, and the repetitive story trope of a character's parents went bye-bye. They even pointed to specific dropped plot threads, like Fairy being powerful AI, or Soldier 11, completely removed from relevancy. As proof, the story was losing its way. Running alongside this was another specific complaint, the lack of resinless behavior. Resin is just the Genshin term for stamina, right? So resinless behavior simply means stuff to do when you're out of stamina, fun side activities. People were asking for more arcade games, more casual content, more reasons to just be in the world, to goon around, I guess. They missed the old, unique in-game systems, like the comic-style panels for storytelling, the knock-knock scrolling on the phone, the old TV mode even, and even the early rally side missions. Instead, it felt like all of the new updates were only adding more grind. This was all compounded by the content volume argument. Players started comparing update sizes directly, pointing out that Genshin update can take 12 to 15 hours to fully go through, while a Zenless Zone Zero update felt like it was finished less than 5 hours. And when you put all of those pieces together, the lost vibe, the drifting story, the lack of fun, casual things to do, and the lower content volume, this entire group arrived at the same conclusion. The game was losing its soul. It was abandoning everything that made it unique to become just another generic gacha slop clone. And for these players, that was a much bigger, more fundamental problem than any shill buff. So the community was essentially split. You had the free-to-play friendly debate, the honeymoon cycle trauma, and this loss of soul identity crisis. It paints a pretty bleak picture, and it happened very, very fast. But then, the Batman of Zenless Zone Zero came along, and dev talk dropped. And the remarkable thing, the really remarkable thing, is that it wasn't just corporate PR. They didn't just post a "we're listening" image. They didn't put out out a survey and completely ignore it afterwards. They specifically addressed every single one of those 3 conflict threads, points by point. So let's start with the endgame. That whole mid-yabi is getting bricked complaint. When a developer intentionally designs a boss to make an old character useless. The response? A new mode called Threshold Simulation. And I'm quoting, designed to let the more veteran characters shine. That is not subtle, that is a direct fix for a very specific problem. The general power creep concern, the idea that your old standard units are being left behind, they announced specific power-ups for standard characters, coming in 2.5. Again, a direct answer. And then, the big one, the gacha slop grind. The endless, tedious farming for discs. They're adding disk drive substat selection. I have to pause on this one because you have to understand. For a Hoyoverse title, this is pretty unprecedented. It has never happened before. This is a level of quality of life, a concession to the player's time that Genshin players have been begging for years. This is not a small thing. This is a massive olive branch. They didn't just stop there though. They announced other specific quality of life features, like one-click AFK feature for the daily grind, an ether battery quick swap, and even in-combat damage compilation, so you can actually see your numbers. But they didn't just stop at gacha mechanics. They went for the identity crisis too. That directionless, boring plot. The response, version 2.4 will be the turning point in the story. That is a developer admitting the story has been stalling and promising to fix it. That feeling of losing the urban vibe, that lack of resinless behavior, of just fun stuff to do. They announced new shops and multiplayer gameplay is back and better than ever. And that complaint about losing old characters, that I miss Fairy the AI sentiment, they really said, worry not old friends, they will continue to appear. And you look at this whole list, this wasn't just a dev talk, it was a direct response. It was on point. It was a point-by-point validation of almost every single major complaint the community had. They didn't just respond to the noise, they proved they were listening to the signal. So what is the real takeaway here, right? It is that the Zenless Zone Zero community, through all of this raw, emotional, and let's be honest, messy discourse, managed to create an unignorable signal. This wasn't drama for the sake of drama. It wasn't noise. It was a critical feedback loop in real time. The community saw a problem, they diagnosed it, and they made sure the developers heard them. And that is what's so fascinating, because the developers listened. That dev talk was, as we just went over, a direct, comprehensive response. It suggests that Zenless Zone Zero might be operating under a different feedback paradigm, like a different model, a different pattern. It feels like the pattern is completely different from HSR and Genshin. And do you know why it's different? Because the community is different. This trauma-informed player base, the veterans from Genshin and Star Rail, they are the ones who were screaming the cycle repeats. They came in knowing exactly what to look for, and because they identified the gacha formula so quickly and so loudly, they may have actually succeeded in pushing for a change much earlier in the game's life cycle. They didn't wait for a year or 2 or 3, they forced the issue now. So congratulations, Zenless Zone Zero players, for being critical, for being honest, for being opinionated. This should set a precedent for other Hoyo games. Look at what happens when you don't defend from criticisms. But of course, brings us to the final lingering question. While the devs responded, we don't know the intents, right? Is this a genuine course correction, a real fundamental change in their philosophy, or is this just a more sophisticated tactic within the cycle, a way to calm everyone down, the immediate problems, and just get smarter about the honeymoon phase next time? The community for now is in a wait and see mode. They're watching to see if the actions consistently follow the words. So I'm curious on what you all make of this. That developer response was pretty direct. Do you think this signals a genuine new direction for Zenless Zone Zero, or are you still holding out judgment? Let me know down below, but that is all from me, 𝗖cie𝗽𝗆𝗿𝗵𝗁, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers!